In the small, seemingly quiet town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, a place dotted with farms, dense woods and rolling fields, there lived a man who at first glance seemed entirely ordinary. His name was Edward Theodore Gein. Born in 1906, Ed was the eldest son of George Gein and Augusta, a strict and deeply religious woman whose influence would shape his mind in ways that would later terrify the world. From the very beginning, Ed's life was marked by isolation and control. His father was distant and ineffectual, leaving most of the parenting to Augusta. She ruled their farmhouse with an iron grip, instilling in her children a distorted view of the world. According to neighbors, she believed that women were either pure and virtuous or corrupt and dangerous. This binary belief consumed Ed, who grew up terrified of women and their supposed capacity for sin. Augusta's obsession with morality and sin created a home where fear reigned. As a child, Ed was quiet, shy, and often withdrawn. He did not have friends outside the family and rarely ventured beyond the edges of the property. Most of his interaction with the world was through work on the farm, but even here he was closely monitored by his mother. He learned early that curiosity or independence could be punished. She drilled into him that the world was a dangerous place, full of sin, and that he must remain pure and obedient. When Ed's father died in 1940, he lost the last of his parental restraint, but ironically this loss gave him even more freedom to descend into darkness. A few years later, in 1945, Augusta herself passed away. For Ed, this was not just a personal loss, it was the moment that would push him into a life of solitude, obsession, and ultimately terror. Alone in the old, decaying farmhouse, Ed began to explore parts of himself and the world that society deemed unacceptable. He became fascinated with death, graveyards, and the human body. Initially, his obsession manifested in secret excursions to local cemeteries. Under the cover of night, he would dig up freshly buried corpses. At first, it was curiosity. He wanted to see the structure of bones, the texture of skin, but over time, it became something more sinister. Ed began bringing parts of the dead back to his farmhouse, hiding them in the dark corners of his home, experimenting with preserving, shaping, and reusing them. Neighbors thought little of Ed's eccentricities. They knew him as polite, soft-spoken, and shy. He had a strange habit of wearing women's clothing, something he did in secret but never flaunted. Some reported seeing him wandering the woods at night, lost in thought, or staring blankly at the horizon. Yet no one suspected that behind this quiet demeanor lurked a man who would become infamous for some of the most horrifying crimes in American history. Ed's isolation allowed his fantasies to grow unchecked. He began constructing a private world inside his home, one in which he could control life and death, comfort and fear. Over the years, this obsession escalated. He didn't just dig up graves, he started to craft macabre items from the remains. Skulls fashioned into bowls, human skin turned into masks, and even furniture covered in flesh. His farmhouse, hidden behind the guise of normality, had become a shrine to morbidity, a private museum of horror. This chapter of Ed Gein's life is crucial because it shows how abuse, isolation, and a disturbed psyche can fester in silence. He wasn't born a monster. He was shaped by fear, religious fanaticism, and the absence of social boundaries. By the time the town began to notice his strange behavior, the damage had already been done. The stage was set for the horrific events that would later shock not only Plainfield but the entire world. Yet, for all his darkness, Ed still seemed like an unremarkable man. He visited the general store, mowed his lawn, and kept his house tidy enough to avoid suspicion. But beneath that quiet exterior was a man obsessed with death, control, and the ultimate recreation of his lost mother in the most gruesome ways imaginable. The townspeople had no idea that the man living among them was cultivating horrors that would become the stuff of nightmares. As Chapter 2 will reveal, the world would soon discover the terrifying truth, the day when Ed Gein's private horrors would spill into public view and leave an indelible mark on history. The quiet town of Plainfield, Wisconsin had always seemed ordinary, a place where neighbors waved to one another, children played in open fields, and life moved slowly, dictated by the rhythm of the seasons. But beneath this serene surface, a darkness had been growing in secret for decades, hidden behind the walls of the Gein farmhouse. That darkness would finally reveal itself in 1957, shocking the town and the nation. The catalyst was the disappearance of Bernice Wardens, a local hardware store owner. Bernice was known for her kindness and diligence, always ready to help her neighbors and customers. On a crisp November day, she vanished without a trace. Concerned friends and family alerted the authorities, and the investigation began. Little did anyone know, This single disappearance would unravel a web of horror that had been festering silently in Plainfield for years. Authorities began by searching for clues around Bernice's home and workplace. Witnesses reported seeing a man matching Ed Gein's description near the hardware store that day. Gein, known as a quiet, solitary figure in the community, drew little suspicion. After all, he was a local, polite, and unassuming. But investigators were not deterred, and their focus soon narrowed on the old farmhouse at the edge of town. When law enforcement approached the Gein residence, they expected a routine search. What they discovered inside would haunt the officers for the rest of their lives. The farmhouse, once just a dilapidated relic of rural life, had become a macabre museum of death. Rooms were filled with objects that no imagination could easily accept. Lampshades made of human skin, bowls crafted from skulls, a belt strung together with what appeared to be human nipples. Every corner of the home seemed to whisper tales of obsession and madness. As the officers explored further, the horrors intensified. Chairs were upholstered with human flesh, and portions of bodies were carefully preserved in jars or stored as grotesque souvenirs. Each object reflected meticulous craftsmanship, revealing the mind of a man who was methodical, patient, and utterly consumed by a single obsession, recreating a twisted version of life from the dead. When confronted, Ed Gein admitted to a shocking range of crimes. He had exhumed corpses from local cemeteries, taking the bodies of recently buried women, those he believed resembled his mother most closely. He confessed to creating his grisly collection of objects from these bodies. He even admitted to the murder of Bernice Wardens, claiming he killed her to obtain the human skin and body parts he needed for his creations. Psychologists and law enforcement struggled to comprehend his motives. Ed's crimes were not fueled by profit or revenge. They stemmed from delusion, compulsion, and a lifelong obsession with death. His obsession with his mother, who had dominated and terrified him throughout his life, had warped into a fixation on recreating her. Through the corpses he exhumed and the objects he crafted, Ed sought to exert control over life and death, blurring the line between reality and his private, horrifying fantasies. The revelation of Ed Gein's crimes sent shockwaves across the nation. Newspapers and media outlets reported the grotesque discoveries in detail, though often sparing some of the most graphic images. People were fascinated and horrified in equal measure. How could a seemingly ordinary man harbor such darkness? How could he live undetected among a community that thought they knew him? These questions became the focal point of discussions about mental illness, isolation, and evil. Ed Gein was charged with murder, but his trial revealed another chilling reality: he was legally insane. He could not distinguish right from wrong in a conventional sense. In 1968, he was committed to a mental institution for the rest of his life, where he remained until his death in 1984. Even in confinement, his story continued to capture the public imagination, becoming the blueprint for countless horror stories and films. Filmmakers and writers drew directly from Ed's crimes to craft fictional tales of terror. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho took inspiration from Gein's obsession with his mother and his use of human skin. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre mirrored his macabre domestic creations. The Silence of the Lambs borrowed elements of his behavior, crafting one of the most chilling villains in cinematic history. These stories ensured that the legacy of Ed Gein, the Butcher of Plainfield, would not fade. But beyond the cinematic adaptations, the real horror lies in the psychology of Ed Gein's life. His story is a study of what happens when isolation, abuse, and mental illness intersect. It is a grim reminder that evil does not always announce itself with loud violence. It can grow quietly, hidden behind polite manners and a seemingly ordinary life. Plainfield, once a town of simple routines and neighborly greetings, carried the shadow of Ed Gein for decades. The farmhouse was eventually demolished, yet the story of its occupant endured, a testament to the terrifying extremes of human behavior. Even today, students of criminal psychology, true crime enthusiasts, and horror writers study Ed Gein, seeking to understand how a man shaped by fear and isolation could commit acts that were unimaginable in scope and detail. Ed Gein's life also sparked debates about the criminal justice system, mental health care, and the nature of evil. Could his crimes have been prevented with better intervention? Was he a product of nature, nurture, or both? The answers remain complex, but the lessons are clear. Neglect, abuse, and isolation can create a fertile ground for horror to grow unnoticed. In the end, Ed Gein is remembered not just for his murders, but for the darkness that can hide behind normalcy. His story serves as a chilling cautionary tale, that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not found in haunted houses or dark forests, but living quietly among us, unseen and unrecognized until it is too late. The Butcher of Plainfield may be gone, but his story remains, a dark chapter in American history that continues to fascinate, horrify, and teach. His crimes remind us that the human mind is capable of both creativity and destruction, sometimes intertwined in ways that defy comprehension. And as the years pass, the legend of Ed Gein endures, a shadowy figure whose life and actions forever altered the way we think about evil.